Oh, it's a beautiful day here in Bridgewater, looking at the Beaver River. So the other day I had a discussion with a colleague of mine, and we were discussing the Confederate flag or the rebel flag or the white supremacist flag, whichever flag you want to give the title to. And I thought that I would make a video about it because I think there's a lot of confusion and controversy about the flag that I think is inaccurate, irrespective of how I feel about it and my own personal opinion of the flag. The first thing that I want to say is I want to give an historical background very briefly about the flag. The one that we know now with the blue cross and the white stars and the red background, that is not the original Confederate flag. I don't know how many of you know this, but the Southern flag went through three variations during the Civil War. And the first one, of course, being it was a blue patch with white circular stars, and it had two stripes, red stripes, one below and one up above it, and white in the middle. That was the original one. The original flag was similar to the Union flag, but it quickly confused soldiers who often couldn't tell the difference between the two on smoke-filled battlefields. So it was perfectly understandable that sometimes they couldn't tell those two flags apart. It was very difficult to see on battlefields when you were full of cannon smoke. Afterwards, a Confederate general by the name of, I think his name was P.J.T. Beauregard, he decided to take some designs and ran away with this idea that he could make a flag that the Confederate soldiers could see. And basically what he did was he made a big white flag. Then he put a square of that in the upper right-hand corner of that flag. Then he put the two blue X's across it with the white stars. That's what he did, and they called it the Stainless Banner. That was the original name of that flag. But there was a problem with that flag, because when the wind didn't blow and it was on the battlefield and it came to rest, it looked like a surrender flag to the Confederate soldiers, as well as Union soldiers. And they said, wait a minute, can't have that. We got to do something about that. So another flag was proposed. Again, what they did was they kept the flag exactly the way it was, except for on the end, they put a big red stripe. Well, that was the flag that they had up until the South surrendered. The other part of the final flag was, of course, being in all its red, the cross of St. Andrew with the big blue X and the white stars. That was the flag of Lee's Army of Northern Virginia. That flag flew on a couple of battlefields, but not many. Very few Union soldiers and very few Confederate soldiers ever saw that flag, ever got sight of it. I don't even think a newspaper article was published about it in the South. Correct me if I'm wrong. That flag was not so well known. However, historically, that flag is the one that became involved with the controversy that we have now. One of the many reasons why, and I'll name a few here, but that flag was carried in civil rights demonstrations by various unpopular circles of societies and groups like white supremacists and Klans people, and even the Ku Klux Klan carried that in civil rights demonstrations that they were not for, that they rightfully, so they thought rightfully opposed. And I can understand why black folks would look at that and say, this is a symbol of white supremacy. I understand where they're coming from on that. And I would probably feel the same way if I was a person of color who came from the South and I saw Klansmen running around with that flag and, you know, taking it in cross demonstrations all over the United States. I perfectly well understand why they do that, but in my mind, again, they're misidentifying that flag. While that flag is associated with a lot of unpopularity, it is not and was never created for a symbol of white supremacy. That Civil War, ladies and gentlemen, was fought for many different reasons. And one can actually argue and say it's just as wrong as for people to think that slavery had everything to do with the war, and those people are just as wrong as the people who say slavery had nothing to do with the war. It was a very complicated civic matter. People were fighting that war for many different things. The Southerners, of course, they thought that they were fighting the Second American Revolution. They saw Union soldiers coming down into the fields of Tennessee and Georgia and Alabama and all over the place with cannons and firearms saying, you're coming down here destroying my way of life. Where folks here in the north, here in Pennsylvania especially, with all the abolitionist groups that we had, said that you cannot do what you want to do. You can't break away from us. We have a lot of folks who are living in the South. We have family here in the South. We want to go visit those folks in the South. Those are our blood brothers in the South. Our families live there. Or some of our children even live there. So it was a very complicated thing, and it was engulfed in many different acclamations of why folks were doing what they were doing and feeling what they were feeling. And here, if you look in this video right now that I'm going to show you here, this Beaver River that you're looking at right now was a gateway for a lot of the slaves coming back from the South, going towards places like Pittsburgh, over yonder that way, New York City, and even as far as Canada. This was a stopping ground for them. They came here for food and clothing and lodgings, operated by two groups of people that are most famous, which was one of the Quakers, and the other one, of course, would be the Harmonites. And for you folks who live in Ambridge, Pennsylvania, and Zillionople, Pennsylvania, and that one other town whose name eludes me right now in Indiana, you can leave a comment below this video about that. But they were the groups of people who were the most staunch abolitionists in Beaver County. They helped the slaves get everywhere they needed to go. They had a bunch of secret locations in Beaver County that we don't know today where they're at, and there's historical reasons for that that I can't get into because we don't really know. And that's not the purpose of this video, but the Harmonites were exclusively dedicated to eradicating slavery in all of America, and yet there's not one plaque here in the Beaver County, Pennsylvania, that has an honorable attestation to their involvement in eradicating slavery. But, and here's something that you need to understand, and I want everybody to quote this. Listen to what I say very carefully, because this holds true. The average Civil War soldier on the Union side or the Confederate side gave a damn about slavery. That's because the average Civil War soldier didn't own slaves and had nothing to do with slaves. Contrary to popular opinion and what you've been taught in the history books in high school and in college, most folks did not own slaves, okay? Only rich and aristocratic people owned slaves. That's just the way it was. Average Civil War people that fought and died in these wars on the battlefields didn't care. Now, I'm not saying that that's the case with every soldier. There were absolute partisans on both sides, depending on which issue they took arms with. That is true. That is also true that we had abolitionist societies throughout Pennsylvania. We even had two abolitionist societies that I know of here in Beaver County. Their locations are unknown to us because nobody wanted to find out where these, nobody wanted them to know where they were at and what they were doing and what kind of activities they were conducting, because a lot of these folks were well-known and highly respected business owners that could not reveal their involvement in the eradication of slavery. So it was a very, very, very complicated thing. And I'm sorry to see that the flag has grown to that reputation, that it has garnered that because people think one specific flag was the idea of white supremacy. It was never intended for that. It was never made with that in mind. So I hope that kind of answers the questions a little bit about the flag. It was never intended to be a symbol of white supremacy. And I want to say before I end this video, I am not for the approbation of the Confederate flag, nor am I for its eradication. That's not the purpose of this video. The purpose of this video is to tell you what I think that flag historically represented and what it represents now and why it's been misrepresented because of what people were saying and thinking about it that has no historical merit. It just doesn't, okay? So let me know what you think. Leave a comment below this video, like, subscribe, and tell me how I'm wrong and tell me how I'm right, and I'll see you in the next video.